Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
The role of recruiting and talent acquisition is firmly in the spotlight as companies struggle to find talent to fill their roles within the organization. And with that spotlight comes the added pressure of communicating the role and value that we as recruiters add to the organization in a way that executive leadership and hiring managers can understand. So today, we're talking about recruiting metrics, but not just any old recruiting metrics. We're focused on delivering and discussing the value that recruiting brings in a way that our leaders can really see the benefit and value that we, as TA, provide. Today, I'm joined by Jason Hopkins. He's the Director of Talent Acquisition and Internal Marketing at Ameris Holdings. Jason, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Thank you, Jessica.
So today we're talking all things recruiting metrics, and Jason is a very dynamic guy, has a very interesting background and kind of how he landed in the role of talent acquisition. Jason, can you talk with us about that journey to your role in TA?
It's funny that you say journey because most people have a career path. I've always called mine kind of a career journey. I started at a sports company. Doing telesales and customer service, and became a designer at one point at that company. Changed industries, went into tech, did some internal communications work, was part of a culture team that was, we were 8 people that were handpicked out of 4,000 to focus on culture and nurturing and kind of moving it forward. Did a little bit of chief of staff work for the VP of HR and VP of talent management, which led to a role in global talent brand marketing, so supporting recruiting, kind of my first taste of actively being a part of a recruiting team. And then recently moved into healthcare here with Ameris, where I started with some strategic HR projects, became a director in marketing for the internal component. And then now I have a dual director role where I handle talent acquisition as well as fill some of those internal marketing components. So a weird journey, but it's all been building blocks to where I am today.
I love that you have this dual role in recruiting and also marketing, because personally I feel like this is the direction that we're headed in the recruiting function, is that it is becoming more of a marketing and funneling role in addition to the traditional way we've been viewing recruiting.
No, you're exactly right. Because again, once upon a time, recruiting was putting a sign outside of the building and saying we're hiring, working through whoever applied and just hiring someone. With the nature of the consumerization of talent in a way, as some use that phrase, it's competitive and people are interviewing you and you have to be able to measure how you're reaching out to someone, what's the engagement, multiple channels, the same way you go through a marketing funnel. It's the same behaviors to be successful today.
Well, let's talk a little bit about recruiting metrics, because that's why people are hopefully listening today. I think most people think about recruiting metrics in a traditional sense, maybe like time to hire, time to fill, and source of hire. Can you walk us through what recruiting metrics are, in your opinion, and the value that they bring?
Well, some of the traditional ones are still valid. Here we measure time to find. So when we present our first qualified candidate to a hiring manager, we do time to fill. So that's for us, that's defined as when someone says yes, and we start background check. Healthcare background checks are much more intense than I experienced in tech. So we also do a time to hire. So that process, the background process. Then we do time to start, which is ultimately what our leaders care about, is button seat. So from when a requisition opens all the way, those time to fill, time to find, all added together is time to start. When are they actually showing up? But also in there, we measure quality. Because anytime I say time to find, people go, oh, well, someone's just going to send someone so that they can get that. No, we measure how many people we send, what's the conversion rate for the folks that we send to how many people get hired. And that's very, very important for us so that we can be efficient. And some of the basic things that are there that have always been there, but we're also looking at, again, from the marketing component, we're measuring our source of hire very closely. When you think of the average third-party vendor, they have a quote-unquote brand component where you put out information about who you are, the likes, the shares, the comments. But then there's always either a database or job posting or whatever it is. And so when we're making investments as a company, we need to know where is our source of hire and what value any third-party vendor is creating for us, whether it's on the hire side or they just purely for getting the word out and adjusting our investments accordingly. So again, it's more than just measuring the ultimate end, I guess, or our ultimate goal of production of bringing someone in, but it's measuring everything up through the funnel to make sure that we're using all of our investments efficiently.
What do you think is the biggest roadblock or miscommunication that happens between maybe recruiting and leadership? And I feel like there's sometimes a disconnect. So I'd be just interested in your thoughts on that and how we create value for them or communicate value, I guess.
Well, I think the first piece, and I've thought a lot about this one, and I've gone through some of past conversations with fellow recruiting leaders in other industries, other companies. And first off, you need to share. You need to be transparent with your metrics and what's going on. There's some that I don't want them to know what's going on, or I feel like I'm being boastful. This is what I did for you. Well, yeah, that is what I did for you. So you should know how many people we've hired, how quickly we did that. But also, as part of my various career journey, for the last 7 years, in one form or another, I've been responsible for assisting with board preparation materials. First at a publicly traded company at Rackspace before coming here to Ameris, and now we're a private company, but we still have a board. And so that's really shaped how I view interaction with leaders because I help prepare them to present at the highest level, rolling up everything that goes on in the company for 90 days and putting that into a presentation. And so ultimately, every board prep meeting starts with basically the board wants to know that you understand your business. So the headwinds, the tailwinds, what do you do well? Where do you have opportunities or improvements or the things that you just stink at? They just want to make sure that you know that and you understand your business. And then ultimately establishing expectations. A board presentation, I always say, is not about the fact that I spent $5 or that we earned $5. It's about the fact that you tell me I was going to earn 3 and you earned 5, or you earned 5, but you told me you were going to earn 10. Those are two very vastly different conversations in preparation because it's about expectations. And then you're reporting on the success. So if you successfully overcame the expectation, do you know why? And then so it becomes repeatable. If you don't meet the expectation, do you understand why so that you can go fix it? And then it's rinse and repeat. And so this is what leaders do to prepare for the board. That's their language. So when you know your audience and you're thinking about their language, you have to prepare yourself that way. In recruiting, again, we have time to fill, time to hire. We have our own language, and our business leaders don't know what those things mean, most of them. And then most of them, unfortunately, aren't going to be in a large forum meeting where you're presenting these metrics and ask you to explain them. So let's just start right off with explaining what those terms mean to us, and then ultimately why they're important. Time to find is important because we have hiring managers waiting on that first candidate. Time to fill is important because someone said yes. And so if we're measuring all those things, and even more importantly, measuring the trends of them, and can speak to the trends, speak to the numbers, and understand, or at least show that you've seen a difference, and you're investigating why, or what have you changed in your vendor mix. What new tools have you brought on, whatever it might be? What new competition are you seeing out in the marketplace? These are the things that business leaders want to hear. And so those metrics set a very solid foundation for a more detailed conversation for us to really show we understand our business.
I love it. And I love that you kind of set the stage with the definitions first, just as a reminder, because while most leaders haven't been involved in the recruiting and hiring process, either as someone who's being recruited or maybe they were doing interviews, they don't see the metrics and the measurement and the tools that are being used and the strategy that's behind the scenes that we see every day.
You're right. And what's even more fascinating in regards to that is that every single person has been a part of the recruiting process. But once we're in a company, sometimes we forget all the things that went into that. The emails we receive, the automated messages, the circle back, the timing, all these things that we wanted when we were part of the recruiting process, and for some reason we forget those things once we're in a company. So it's always great to remind those leaders those components as well.
Before we record the podcast, normally a week or so in advance, I normally have a call with the person that we're going to do the interview with, and this week was you, or last week we talked, and in the kind of prep call where we were kind of talking about the conversation that we're going to have today, we talked a little bit about recruiting dashboards. And I think that a recruiting dashboard means different things to different people. So I wanted to get your take on what's on your recruiting dashboard and the purpose that it serves for you and your TA team.
Absolutely. And so when we say recruiting dashboard, one thing that people are all familiar with is the dashboard on your car. So when you're staring at the dashboard of your car, it has all the important things that are there to make sure that you're safely going down the road. So you know your speed, you know how much gas you have, you know what the oil temperature is. You've got all those components right there in front of you so that you can monitor them regularly and make sure you're okay. So when I think about a recruiting dashboard, it has to have all those same things so that at a glance and continuously, I can look at that dashboard and make sure that we're running down the road the way we're supposed to, and we need to make adjustments if necessary. So the metrics we've already talked about, the time to fill, all those components are there so that we can measure the trends of what we did last quarter versus this quarter. We also, beyond just the time to fill of our overall company, Ameris is regionalized as far as we have different partnerships with hospitals around the nation. And so we measure and compare from one region to the next. What is San Antonio doing versus what is Las Vegas doing? And is there some best practices to share? We also, again, measure that quality component, how many candidates we're submitting to how many are hired, qualified to hired. We're also, again, trying to measure referrals. We all know the value of referrals. That could be a whole nother podcast on why referrals are important, but where are we seeing the healthy referrals in one region versus another? Those are all valuable pieces of that dashboard. And so, those are all very much production components and quality components, but we also measure service. We recently had an in-house speaker at our executive offsite, Chip Madera, and he talked about that just doing your job is not good enough anymore. It's the perceived value of what you bring. And so we measure our service. We go out and we poll our hiring managers. Everyone who had a hire the previous quarter gets an opportunity to submit a survey. So what did they think about the hiring process? Did it meet their expectations? What can we do better? What did we do well? So we continue to do those things. We survey our candidates. Currently today, we're only surveying our hires, but very quickly here, we'll be surveying every candidate. And that's opening Pandora's box in some way because of someone who didn't get hired. But that's a common thing nowadays you want to look at every candidate experience, not just the ones who get a job and are sipping on the Kool-Aid really hard. Often the best value and feedback comes from those who didn't get the job. Did they still have a good experience? So it's just a portion of some of the things that we're measuring on our dashboard on a day-to-day basis, as well as workforce planning. Our load and our average rec load and our expectations for how many hires each of our recruiters, we call them talent acquisition leads here at Ameris, are required to do each month is based upon demand. So we're partnering with our other portions of HR to understand what attrition is in each market, by our critical roles even more so, and making sure that we have the right amount of people on the team, the right amount of horsepower to handle what the business is asking of us.
In that conversation that we had last week, you also talked about an interesting way that you're measuring lost productivity in your recruiting metrics. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I've broken down our recruiting process kind of by segment. How much time, again, kind of back to the workforce plan and trying to figure out demand, and what our capability is. I've broken down how long do we spend sourcing or reviewing candidates? How long do we spend scheduling screenings and performing screenings? How long do we spend coordinating interviews and getting feedback from our hiring managers? And then how much time do we spend on the administrative task to get someone ready to actually be hired? And I've broken down that with there's some swag in there because everyone's different, every role is a little bit different, but it's a pretty solid guideline of the segments and how much time it takes in each. And so when we're looking and working with individuals, and we just had performance reviews, we're in that process right now, we're looking at ways to increase our productivity, knowing that as the business doubles, our team's not going to double. And I'm sure every recruiting leader just said amen to that, who's listening, because that's the case. So we have to figure out a way that as the business doubles, which increases demand, we have to have more and more output. So on each of those segments, we've been working as a team to continually try to figure out how can we take the hour and 20 minutes of screening and and make that faster. Can we incorporate video interviewing for some of our more entry-level roles? So that we actually never touch that rec until a hiring manager's already watched the video of the potential candidate and chosen who they want to talk to. Just things like that in our process. When I first started here and was asked to support the talent acquisition activities, we had a lot of manual processes, uploading documents from one place to another, saving them here. And we've been working and investing with our tools. We use iCIMS as an ATS, and we also use Workday as a HRIS system. And now we're connecting them to where there's some automation on the front end of our process with the rec approval process and opening up new recs, but also on the back end that once someone is hired, all their documents go into our system of record in Workday. So really, again, when you think about the best recruiters that are out there, their value to the company is their ability to speak to the mission, the vision, understand the candidates that they're speaking to and what gaps might be existing in their life that they're maybe not even aware of, that this particular company and our opportunity working here can fill those gaps for them. And the more time we can create where they spend on that value add, the close the candidate, the better off we are in the long term. So all the things before and after, can we automate? Can we streamline our processes, still maintaining a good candidate experience on both sides of the engagement with the recruiter, but can we streamline those things and really focus on the value add, especially with, again, how competitive it is that once we get someone on the phone that is qualified and interested, we do not want to lose them because we spent a lot of time to get them.
Let's take a bit of a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology podcast. We're talking about recruiting metrics and how to communicate your metrics, the good, the bad, and the ugly to all audiences when it comes to recruiting. So today I'm talking with Jason Hopkins, and you can follow on Jason on Twitter. I recommend that you do. It's at jhop with two P's, JHOPP 12.
At Workology, we're making HR learning and recertification simple with Learn, our on-demand learning platform providing 24/7 access to pre-approved HRCI and SHRM courses. Visit workology.com/learn to find out more. And use the discount code podcast to save 20% off your membership. Now, back to Jessica.
Let's talk a little bit more about recruiting metrics here. Can you talk about how you're using them to seek investment for projects or new initiatives? You mentioned some different tools and technologies that you're doing or that you're using and implementing, but how are you using your metrics to help communicate the value of and the benefit of maybe a new tool or technology, adding that to your recruiting technology stack?
So previously we talked about, again, our leadership audience. They want to know that we understand our business, and ultimately any investment has to have an ROI. And I hate saying ROI, but it's true. It's a return on investment. If I'm going to spend $5 to help you do something, show me how that's going to bring in 7 or 10 or 15. And so when we're asking for investment, The days of saying this is just table stakes, I'm supposed to get this money to go do recruiting, those are long gone, or at least they've been long gone for the leaders that I've worked for the last 5 years. You have to be able to articulate how this investment is going to impact the bottom line. What we did at my previous company, and we're in the process of making this more formal here at Ameris, we worked with our HRIS team because that's where all the data is housed. As far as who's come in, who's left, why they've left, all those components. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we help bring new people into the company. And often that is driven by attrition. So what we did previously is try to understand the cost of attrition at any company and put a dollar amount on it. It started just as a general average. So let's say I have a team of 5. One person puts in their notice and they're gone. And we know, and we've measured, that the time to replace that person is 35 days. So if they put their 2 weeks notice in, we're looking at, basically a delta of about 20 days where we don't have anyone in that seat. What we try to understand, and we understand this from a subjective view, is that person's workload has to fall on the rest of the team. It's a draw on them, or something just doesn't move forward. There's a loss of productivity there. And so we put a number on it. And I think we were able to establish that at the time for Rackspace, we put it at about $4,000 a day. So for that delta of that 20 days times 4,000, do the quick math, that's a lot of money for that seat to be open. And so, therefore, when we're trying to make investment, the one number that is going to impact the business is reducing the time to fill. And so, say that you're going to spend $10,000 on a new system or tool. What I work with the vendors to understand, and you can see that a lot of case studies talk about this, is that how are you going to reduce my time to fill? They say, well, we can reduce your time to fill by a day. Now, everyone listening is like, okay, well, a day, big deal. Well, a day is a big deal. So if it's 35 days, we take it down to 34 days, and that's multiplied by the 200, 1,000, 2,000, depending on the size of your company, of the number of hires that you're going to make that year. If that one tool can reduce it by 1 day for all of those hires, and you've established the cost of attrition, and let's say it's still $4,000, that's $4,000 across 2,000 hires. That more than covers the cost of that $10,000 investment. And then back to how we communicate our business, you say, and this is where, the rubber hits the road, as they say, that you sit in front of a leader and say, I'm going to make this $10,000 investment. I'm expecting to reduce time to fill by this, which is a bottom line increase for our business of X. I think we're going to be fully ramped and see the results of this in 120 days. So here you are, 120 days later, and you have to own up and say, have you actually seen a reduction by 1 day? If you have, congratulations, and say this really, really worked. This is how we implement it, blah, blah, blah. If you haven't met that, you have to be there to say what went wrong. Is it purely the investment, or is there a market shift? Is there a change? So again, the data is a foundation for communication and conversation. But that's where I've started. That's where I've been successful in making some investments, because as you know, talent acquisition vendors are not cheap. And so sometimes there's sticker shock when you bring those things to your leaders.
Yeah, but when you position it in a way that says we're going to reduce our lost productivity by $4,000 per day, like for the hire, and then times 1,000 hires, the numbers make sense. And so that $150,000 or $5,000 investment, whatever it may be, doesn't seem so high anymore, or maybe such a risk.
Yeah, and it's so crazy that some of the things that we do are not cheap. But when you go into perspective, again, with some of the other checks our leaders write, I know for us, every time we build a hospital, that's a couple $1 million that we write a check for. So we're writing some very expensive checks every day as a business. Outside of HR, outside of recruiting, it's usually very clear why we're writing that check, because it's what they're used to seeing. And again, back to the whole kind of point of this podcast, again, of understanding the metrics and how do you communicate them, why they're important, what's the value. That's the value, is it helps you create that same common language of, I'm going to invest this is what I'm going to get. And it starts to move the perception of HR, and particularly talent acquisition, from just being a cost center to, in a sense, it's revenue impacting. We may not be revenue generating, but we're revenue impacting because we're controlling the bottom line. And so I hate being called a cost center. I'm very sensitive to that, because every single day that we hire someone and we can hire them faster, or we hire the right person and they stay longer, we're impacting that bottom line every single day.
I love how you're making the connection between revenue and lost productivity and that position being left unfilled. I think it's a great way to kind of reposition the conversation from cost center to revenue center, for sure. Let's talk about something that's not necessarily metrics related. Indirectly it is, but I really love something that you're just kicking off at Ameris, which relates to service level agreements. Can you kind of walk us through that?
Absolutely. And it's going to sound basic once we're complete, but in a lot of ways it's revolutionary at the same time. But our leadership, we're a growing company. We're going on 12 years of being open, but for the average healthcare company, we're babies. And so we're going through a lot of growth pains and shifts, and growing in business acumen. We're just having a lot of shift and almost a changing of the guard. As part of that, our new CEO, Craig Gogan, he has asked us as corporate departments to really look at all of our processes, again, for the sake of being efficient. When you're a smaller company, there's a lot of things that you do to support the rest of the company that are good things, they add value. Are they creating a conflict between other things that are more beneficial to the company? So he's asked us to look at all of our processes and decide the things that we're going to stop doing. Also talk about the things that we are doing and put some very specific KPIs on them, key performance indicators. And not only what are we doing for the regions or for our customer out in the business, but what are we expecting them to do for us? And so we're putting those things together. We're going to go out to the regions, whether that's virtual or live meetings, and walk through our SLA contract. This is what I'm going to do for you, and this is what I expect you to do for me. Do you have any other feedback? If you need me to change something, and really have an open dialogue about the service we offer, and then have alignment on email response time. Like every recruiter gets that call that we have to open this rec. Is very, very, very important. You go chase, you find a candidate, and then you submit the candidate, and it goes into a black hole. You hear no feedback. We're setting an SLA on how quickly you should respond, but not how quickly you should respond, but what's involved in that response as you provide feedback. Very specific points. I need to know, were they not a cultural fit? And if so, why? Was their experience a little off? Well, why? All those different components, so that we can educate ourselves to make sure we bring the next candidate. The next candidate shows up, doesn't end up being the same person. So we're establishing those SLAs and establishing those contracts, and the intent is for us to sign them, and so that when we're reviewing metrics or reviewing our service and our quality on a quarterly basis, there's less subjectivity to did you do well or did you do not. We go back to that SLA, and do we meet what we said we were going to meet on both sides. In recruiting, we've always felt the accountability coming from the business, but a lot of times we haven't felt like they were also accountable to us. So what we're doing is creating that mutual accountability, which is going to even enhance the partnership that we've tried to build with our regions around the recruiting process.
I feel like we need to have you come back in a little bit and focus on referrals, and then talk to us about the results or initial, like, first results from the SLAs, and walk us through some challenges, some wins, changes that you've had since implementing them.
No, I would love to. It's going to be like anything. It's a new thing for me. I'm super excited about it. My team is excited about it. And it's new for our business. And so it's going to have, like anything that's new, it's going to be clunky. I know it's going to be such. But on the other end of it, I think it's going to be magical.
Expectations are a great thing. Mutual expectations and understanding. I feel like you guys are going to you're going to see some really great results.
I am optimistic, hopefully optimistic.
Yeah. Well, Jason, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. I have to say, this has been wonderful. I love hearing your point of view and how you're looking at metrics and how you're communicating to leadership. And I think that a lot of people will get value from this podcast. Where can people go to connect with you and learn more about what you're doing over at Ameris?
So as you mentioned, I'm on Twitter at jhop, JHOPP 1212, as well as connect with me on LinkedIn, Jason Hawkins. I'm in the Houston area. There's one or two other Jason Hawkins out there. Surprise, being born in the 80s, there's a lot of Jasons. I make the promise to keep some updates. Over the course of the last year, we've had a lot of life changes. I've gotten married. I've bought a house. I had knee surgery. We have a 5-month-old. So my Twitter activity and social media activity has been a little sloppy, except for baby pictures. But I am committed to get back to really trying to connect with folks in regards to just some of the things that we're trying to accomplish from a business sense.
You have a lot on your plate, and this guy gets up early, friends, 5 a.m. Hit the gym this morning, so he does it all. He does it all. But thank you so much for
keeps me sane.
Yeah, no, I get it. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk. I appreciate it.
Oh, and Jessica, thank you for having me. I really, really enjoyed myself.
Metrics and dashboards. Everyone needs them, but with being so pressed for time in our jobs, these sometimes seem to go by the wayside. I hope that Jason's interview gave you some inspiration and food for thought when it comes to communicating metrics and building your recruiting dashboard. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller Merrill. Until next time, you can visit workology.com to listen to all our previous podcast episodes. Have a great day.
Production services for the Workology podcast with Jessica Miller Merrill provided by TotalPicture.com.